Hi, welcome to On the Block. I'm Ed Wilkinson, and I'm here today with Msgr Bob Romano, who's not only a pastor in the diocese, but is also one of the chaplains for the New York City Police Department. A two-star chief, right? Is that?
That's right.
Are you the chief of chaplains?
Not yet.
So listen, as the police chaplain, I guess you must be called to a lot of emergencies in the diocese, not only in the diocese, in the entire city. What's it like being on call like that, and some of the things that you get called to, I guess, are pretty challenging?
Yeah, it's the thing is that you go to bed at night and you say, please, I hope this phone doesn't ring. And you never know if it's going to ring for the parish or if it's going to ring for the police department. The other night, I put my head down on the pillow and I think I was asleep for maybe 20 minutes, and we got the call about this police officer in the 6-7 precinct who was dragged 2.5 blocks and is fighting for his life right now.
Well, what you get called to do? What, you have to go see the family, or do you go to the hospital to see the police?
Both. Many times we have to make the notifications to the families, and sometimes that's done already. Sometimes maybe there's a member of the family who hears about it, and then they'll go and talk to the family. But certainly I'll always respond to the hospital, and then I'll be there with the family for as long as it takes. Sometimes, police officers sent to surgery, or they're sent for tests. And so what we do is we sit and we wait. We hold people's hands and put our arms around them and just pray with them.
What happens in the case of an officer who's killed in the line of duty, and you have to go and you break the news to the family, a wife or a mother or a father? I mean, what words do you use? It's
the worst job in the world, and when you knock on the door and they open that door and they see a collar and they see other police officers, they know exactly what's going on. And it's just, it's something that is the worst part of the job.
It's it's a tough job being a cop, and especially, in some communities, cops are not liked as much as in other communities. And we live in a time when we're thinking about terror all the time. So you go to Manhattan and you see these anti-terror units, and you see machine guns, and it's you're always on duty and you're afraid of what could happen. So, I mean, how do you feel when you see these like anti-terror groups out there with the automatic weapons? That could put you on edge.
I guess we've never seen it here in the United States. I remember traveling back in the 70s to Europe, and I was kind of frightened by the fact that in the airport there were police and they were carrying machine guns. I went to Israel and they got kids carrying guns, and so now to see it in New York, it's a little unsettling, but it's also reassuring, the fact that we're well protected in the city of New York.
How do you interact with the guys and the gals on the job themselves? You get much of a chance to go to the houses, precincts, and
yeah, we just finished a program called Are You OK? And we did it in conjunction with many of the other units in the police department, the counseling unit, employee assistance, the self-support group, which is made up of wounded and injured police officers. And we talked about some of the problems that police officers have: alcohol, drugs, not street drugs, but prescription drugs. They get hurt, they give them painkillers, and unfortunately, some of them get hooked on it, and that's a big problem. And then suicide.
There's a high rate of suicide, isn't there, among police officers?
Too many. Sometimes you don't know why. Sometimes there's a note, but very rarely. Sometimes it's just the spur of the moment. They're in one room laughing and joking with the family, and then they go into another room and they take their life. There's no way of understanding it sometimes.
Have you ever known anybody personally who has taken their life? And,
I have, yeah.
What was that like? I mean,
it's tough.
Could you see it coming?
No. The guy that I can remember when I first got on the job, he used to drive one of the commissioners. And he was the nicest guy in the world, friendly, laughing and all that. And then one day I got the call, and when I got to the hospital, I was flabbergasted, So, and then of course he was driving the commissioner, and the commissioner, he was all upset because of the fact he never saw it either coming.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is. Sometimes it's just a split decision.
What's the most satisfying part of being a police chaplain?
I think it's interacting with the police officers. Ever since 9/11, the job of the chaplain has grown a lot. People see us, people want to talk to us. In the past, I think people were afraid of the chaplains, and they were afraid for different reasons. But now it's a big thing now. Whenever there's a retirement party or a promotion party, they want a chaplain to come and say the prayer. I think 9/11 brought a new awareness of religion, of spirituality. I'm not saying that everybody goes to Mass on Sunday or goes to church or synagogue on Saturday, but I think that people are a little bit more aware of the presence of God in their life.
Mm-hmm. Of course, there is a Police Holy Name Society, right? There's one in New York, there's one in Brooklyn and Queens.
Right.
Pretty active group, right?
Right. We have an organization called the Regina Caeli Society for the women in the police department. And also we have the Anchor Club, which is a shoot-off of the Knights of Columbus.
And they have annual retreats. I know sometimes they organize it. Is it tough getting the guys to go on retreat?
At one time we filled Bishop Malloy Retreat House. We had cops in the actual monastery. It's kind of gotten smaller, but it's building up again. We have the retreat, we have memorial masses. The police department never forgets. And you know, we have on my church back in Brooklyn, we have a plaque for Lieutenant Joseph Petrosino, who was killed over 100 years ago. And there's a park in Manhattan and a park in Brooklyn. And the family is still alive and well, and he's remembered every year. We don't forget.
What's the spirit among the young people going into? Is it the same spirit that, you know, it used to be almost like a family job? People would come in, you know, the father and the son would become a police officer. Is there that same camaraderie among people entering the police force these days?
I think that that still continues. There's a family kind of component that happens. You know, you'll always hear it at graduation that we have maybe 50 or 60 or 70 members of this graduation class that have parents or brothers and sisters on the job. So I think a lot of it is it's a family business in many ways for people.
Speaking of families, we have the McDonald family, of course, Connor now, and Stephen was a great, very well known here in New York. Were you friendly with Stephen? Did you
Very,
know?
yeah. In fact, I celebrated on the 30th anniversary of his shooting Mass in the home, and unfortunately I can't celebrate it at the funeral, and then celebrated the Month's Mind Mass at the home. And as a matter of fact, I was just there this week up in Albany. He was honored by the New York State Senate, and they named a portion of the Southern State Parkway in his memory.
Great guy. So we're going to come right back. Stay right where you are. We're on the block today here in Douglaston. Welcome back to On the Block. I'm Ed Wilkinson. I'm here today with Msgr. Bob Romano. So we were talking, before we leave the police department, I just want to ask you, how do you become a police chaplain?
I don't know.
Do you ask, volunteer for this?
No, actually, I guess you're appointed either by the police commissioner or by the mayor. It was a funny story with me. I had been chaplain to the group of police officers that were wounded and injured in the line of duty, and they used to have their annual celebration at St. Anselm's in the auditorium. And I used to take care of the things for them, and they would say, could you come down and say grace today? So I said, well, won't your chaplain want to do that? And they said, we don't have one. Would you like to be? I said, oh, yes. And that's how I got involved. And I was at a party, and I would go every month to this other group, and one day the commissioner called me up. I was on vacation, and I don't know how he got the number, but he called me, and I said to him, how did you get this number? I was up in the Poconos, and he said, you're lucky I didn't send a Pennsylvania State Troopers. He said, I didn't want to scare your mother, but he says, we seriously want you to be a chaplain. And I said to him, why me? And he said, very easy. He said, when you walk in a room, cops talk to you. They don't run away from you. So that's how I got it.
Okay, well, speaking of why and me, let's talk about why are you a priest today? And let's go away, but when was the first time you thought about becoming a priest?
Why did I become a priest? The prayers of my mother, that's for sure. I guess I thought about becoming a priest when I was in the 7th grade. Before that, it was so mysterious, you know, Mass was in Latin, and we go to church on Sunday, and I was trying to figure out everything. And then I guess when I was in the 7th grade, I started to hear about this place called Cathedral. And I was a little hesitant because I didn't want to become a missionary, and I didn't know too much about where, you know, people would go. And then I heard about this thing called the diocesan priesthood, and a good friend of ours, Father Schmidt, said about it, and he explained that, you know, you would work either in Brooklyn or in Queens, and I said, that's something that you know, and so I signed up for the test that we had to take for the high schools back then. They call them a different name today, the co-ops, we call it co-ops, and I put down my choice, Cathedral first, and I made it. And I was really excited about it. And the first day we walked in, there were 80 guys in the class, and they said, 10% of you will be ordained. And by golly, 10%.
Is that right?
There were only 8 of us were ordained from Brooklyn Cathedral.
Right, from first year high school all the way through,
Exactly.
which would be like a 12-year period.
Exactly, yeah.
So how did you find high school? I mean, that wasn't the easiest place in the world to get through. That was a tough academically.
It was a tough school. You know, when I listened to my cousins who went to Bishop Lachlan, and they had choices in what they were studying, languages and all that, and of course you and I know there were no choices.
No.
You did what they told you to do. And I guess that was a part of breaking you in for the priesthood. You know, sometimes you have to do what's needed to be done, not what you want to do. And I think also that whole idea of going to school on Saturday and being off on Thursday was a precursor to, you know, the life of a priest.
But you were in the seminary system at a time when, in the 60s, when everything was changing.
Exactly.
The church was changing very quickly, and the system was changing, education was changing. You came out here to this place where we are today talking.
And it completely changed.
Completely changed, right? How did you find the college years? I mean, did you ever have any doubts during your college years and say, what am I doing here?
No, actually, I never had any doubts. I was set on it. This is what I was going to do, and I was happy to do it, and I felt strong in my vocation. There were challenges here. There were challenges, definitely, because not everybody thought the same way as Brooklyn Cathedral.
Sure.
You know, we had guys from Queens Cathedral, we had guys from St. Pius X out on Long Island, and we had the fellows from the Archdiocese, Manhattan Cathedral. And everybody was different, you know? It was sort of like a different way of being brought up in your vocation. And I guess we were, I always thought, the strongest in the sense that we had good priests. And those were the best years of my life, that high school, those 4 years of high school, because the priests that were there, they really and truly gave me the vision to see what priesthood is. And a lot of the things I do in my life are based upon the priests of my past. And
are there any particular priests that you look up to as role models that you would say influenced your priesthood and your ministry?
Well, I think the priest from my home parish, and Father Schmidt was one of them, good friend of yours, I know, and mine, and Father Richie Rader, who was there, who died very young in a tragic accident. But those were the guys who taught me, not by what they said, by what they did.
What was it? What was it about them, do you think?
Just the way that they interacted with people, how people sought them out, how they would be there with people. And a lot of the things that I do, I catch myself, you know, following in their example. And I think today, a lot of the priests that are being ordained, I don't know if they have that same kind of challenge. A lot of them are delayed vocations. A lot of them went to different high schools and colleges, and then they come into the seminary, and the seminary is a totally different system than what I went through.
As you're going through, as we said, it's 12 years. It can seem like an awfully long time. I mean, it seems like you're never going to get there, right?
It was like the never-ending story,
That's right.
you know. But it happened, and you know, and I guess as we get older, time goes by a lot faster. But it happened.
And then when you got to the major seminary, they added on another year, right? They added on that pastoral year in the middle?
Right, exactly.
You had that, right?
I had that.
And where were you sent?
I was sent to Regina Pacis.
Oh, okay.
I said I wanted a small Italian parish, and they sent me to the largest one.
What did you learn from that experience?
I learned a lot more about the Italian culture. I used my Italian a lot more. We didn't speak Italian at home. I learned it, you know, in the seminary, you know, and I always felt inadequate in it, but I got through.
And when you were ordained, that was a time when they were doing single ordinations, wasn't it? So you were ordained all by yourself.
I was ordained all by myself
at Regina Pacis. Nice
yeah.
place to be ordained.
And I'm the only person that was ever ordained there in the Basilica,
right?
yeah.
Ah. What do you, that was Bishop Msgr? Mm-hmm. What do you remember about that day itself at Regina and that ordination ceremony?
I remember they closed 65th Street for me. Afterwards, the bishop, when we would go and we'd give the kiss of peace to the family and all that, Bishop Msgr was crying. And he says to me, "How do you feel?" So I looked at him and I said, "I feel like a priest." And he smiled, you know.
Great, it's a great start. We're going to take another quick break. We're here with Monsignor Robert Romano, and stay with us because we'll be coming right back. Hey, welcome back to On the Block. I'm Ed. This is Monsignor Bob Romano, one of the Chief of Police. And we're glad you were able to join us today, Monsignor. Let's talk a little bit. We talked about ordination and your studies for the priesthood, and now you get ordained. They send you to Bay Ridge, to St. Anselm's Parish. How many years were you there?
11 years.
Well, that's a long time for a first
It
assignment.
was, yeah.
What do you remember about
They
that?
didn't have a program in place at that time. The interesting thing was I did, in second year theology, I did my pastoral there.
Oh.
So when I went back, I kind of knew a lot of the people, so it was a lot easier. Mm-hmm. And of course, one of my best friends, his parents lived in that parish. And it was just, you know, I felt very much at home for the 11 years I was there.
What were some of the duties that you had, some of the societies that you worked with?
Well, I had the altar service, I had CCD, I had all the things that a newly ordained would, the youth activities and stuff like that, you know. And so it was a challenge, you know, to kind of get everything. And I have to say that the people that I lived with, there were 4 other priests. They were much older than I am. I think the next priest was like 20 years older than I was. So, and then by the time I was getting to the end, he left. He had become a pastor, and then the space and age was even phenomenal. And the pastor, Monsignor Dan Colbert, who was a wonderful guy. And from the first day I was there, he said to me, "I want to teach you how to be a pastor." And he did a great job. I learned a great deal from him. And unfortunately, he suffered from diabetes. He lost his leg, and he was out a lot, you know, for surgery and all that. And I kind of took over. And the older guys, they didn't want to be bothered. They give it to the young guy. And I learned a great deal from him, and I was able to use it there. And I was able to use it in other places.
You also were involved in some youth work at Fontbonne Hall, which wasn't far from there. You were a chaplain to them, right?
I'm there 40 years. I just celebrated my 40th anniversary of priesthood, and I'm celebrating my 40th anniversary of being at Fontbonne.
Wow, so you still go over there?
I still go there, yeah.
How many hats do you wear?
A lot. And I was also involved in the Christian Awakening program.
What is it about the young people today? You know, it's different from when we were youngsters. I mean, they grow up differently. You know, and a lot of them are not attached to the church. They don't have the basic understanding of church that we had it, that we were, you know, was taught to us.
And I think that's because of the parents. Mm-hmm. The parents are the ones who give the children. You know, I see the kids that when I was in St. Anselm's that I knew, I saw them grow up and all that. They're all going to church, but today you find so many parents don't go. There's a lot of broken homes, so the kids don't know, you know, daddy takes them but doesn't take them to church. And then you get, I always bring this up, you know, when you hear confessions from the kids, sometimes you can't help but laugh, you know. And I said, you going to church? And they said, well, not all the time, you know, because we go visit my grandmother and there's no churches there. Really? Where does your grandmother live? Staten Island, you know? And I laugh because where are they hearing this from? They're hearing it from the parents, you know. So.
You also worked with the Christian Awakening over at St. Paul Center, I guess,
yeah,
right?
I did that for many years.
Those kids, they seemed to get it in those days. They were a special group of kids, I think.
It was, yeah. They were selected to come and to make the weekend experience, and they were open to it, you know, and they listened to it. And I think a lot of them are involved, you know, with the faith today because of what the seeds that were given to them. You know, they thought about it. Religion wasn't just something that you read in a book or we studied in a catechism and remembered everything, but they saw, I think, religion and faith alive, people doing things, you know, and I think that caught on, and it's too bad that program, you know, has kind of fallen apart.
Yeah, it has. Well, you're the pastor now of Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish over there in Dyker Heights, I guess we call that, right?
Yep.
How do you split your time between being the chaplain to the police and also as a pastor? Because you don't have the help that you probably had at one time in the parishes.
You had to ask that question, huh?
You're on call all the time, I guess.
It's tough. It's tough because they're two full-time jobs. Again, you know, I don't know when I'm going to get called with the police department. But again, I don't know when I'm going to get called in the parish either. I'm very lucky I have two associates. And the two associates, you know, when I interviewed them, I said, this is the life here. And, you know, this is what I have to do. It's not what I want to do. It's really what I have to do. And so they're very good to cover me. And I try to be equal and fair with them. But sometimes I can't. You know, I just can't because I'm just running around too much.
How do we make the religious life, priesthood, sisterhood, brotherhood, how do we make that attractive to young people today?
Well, I think that, you know, we took a pretty bad hit a couple of years ago. And I think a lot of people were...
With the sex abuse scandal,
yeah,
right?
I think a lot of people were turned off to the priesthood and a religious life and all that. But you know what? You know who the biggest supporters were to me when that happened? The police. They'd say, don't get down on it because it happens to us all the time. And isn't it true? A cop does something wrong and it's on the front page of the paper. A priest does something wrong, it's on the front page of the papers too. And it goes for a while and then it goes away until maybe something else happens. But I think that, you know, to understand that the priesthood is an opportunity to share your faith with other people and to help them in their faith to understand what God expects of them, you know. It's tough. It is tough. You see the numbers that are going to church, the people moving out of the neighborhoods, and the people who are moving in are not Catholic. And no matter how hard you work at trying to get the message of Catholicism that the church is open to you, it's tough.
Sure. Well, I want to wish you the best of luck. Thanks so much for being with us today.
It's always a pleasure.
And I hope your phone doesn't ring tonight when you go home.
I hope not either.
Thanks for being with us, and thank you for watching. You've been watching On the Block. Our special guest today has been Msgr Bob Romano, pastor, police chaplain, all-around great guy. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you again next week.